Good morning. Welcome, members, and anybody else who's watching. I'm about to begin a very short behind the seams tour of our current exhibit called Sewful Work. It's generally hand sewing, so you can really be amazed at the number of stitches and the intricacy of some of the work. The first piece I'm going to show you is a strip quilt. It's by Annette Cook. And I want you to keep in mind the fact that she hand stitched this. She put it all together with her own stitching, and then she hand embroidered. She sort of invented a lot of the fat flowers and leaves, the forms and shapes of them, but she covered the whole thing with her hand work. The top shelf of this case has some very, very delicately done, intricate pieces. There's a piece of pineapple croquet in the frame, and then the same artist, who's a Catherine Cullen Riley, did what is called a latticework piece, which is on the black velvet. That's surrounded by some tatting examples. Tatting is done with knots. It's a series of slip knots. Each stitch has one knot and then one knot to lock it. And what's really neat is this whole doll bonnet is covered with tatting. The tatting work that's on the black velvet and some of the other tatting work is by Faith Bacci. This is a very fun group of things done by Louise Travers. Needlepoint sneakers and some needlepoint for the wall. Louise said that she got the flat pieces of a canvas, and then she needlepointed them, and then they were sent to Vans to be made into sneakers. So can you imagine playing tennis in these gorgeous needlepoint sneakers? Very fun. This is hardanger work. It's a combination of cut work, which means the cloth is cut out, and then the holes that were made are surrounded by a lot of buttonhole stitching. There's other stitching too. These are satin stitches, and this is more of a running stitch. But if you look at the front of this jacket, it's pretty amazing. It took a lot of time and effort. But you have to remember that a lot of the ladies who were doing this work didn't work the way we do, and they didn't have to do housework and things like that. They had a lot of leisure time and could spend that time quilting and sewing and doing handwork. This is a blue and white basket quilt by Chris Dole. It's really pretty fantastic because it combines applique, the handles are appliqued on, and then these pieces of the basket itself, the triangular pieces, are fitted into the quilt. And this whole thing has been done by hand. This may be machine stitched here, but the whole back is hand quilted. And Chris is very proud of, the amount of work and the intricacy of her pattern, which is a repeat, and it's just very, very neat, and it's very big piece to work on. Then we also have a Chinese bed cover that was done early in the 19th century and was owned and used by Sarah Roach Arnold. And if you come real close, you can see the number of different kinds of stitches that were done on the peacock. Some of this is very flat stitching, which is satin stitch, but then there are other stitching which is, I think this is called a herringbone for the tail, and this is something else which almost looks like crow's feet. So it's wonderful too. And of course it was all done by hand because it was before there were any machines. Unfortunately, the back is totally lined, so we can't see what happened in the back. So this group of pieces are Embroidery by Elaine Mcbride. And you really have to look at them very closely because the stitching is so dense and the whole thing is done with stitching. This is a whole figure with bird, tree, snake. The child is wearing patent leather shoes. I mean, it's wonderful. And this is one about, I think it's called Dad. And this has got, it looks like it's a monkey lying on top of a hill on the top. They're just wonderful. And the stitching is just so close together and makes a very colorful, intense picture. The bottom shelf here has something which I've never seen before. It's something done by a woman in Fayal by the name of Isaura Rodriguez. It's wheat sheaves that she pounded, and she must have painted them gold, and then she embroidered the net with the wheat. And it's really quite wonderful. I guess it's a kind of technique, but we don't know, the woman who loaned it to me, and I don't know what the actual technique is called. This case is filled with work by Melinda Medeiros, and every square has a different look to it. She's used different kinds of stitching, all hand stitching, to create her patterns. Eventually, I think she's going to do a couple more squares and then make it into a big bed cover. But if you come real close, you'll see we have some of the stitching that we've already seen. There's tatting again. And this stitching here, I think, is a feather stitch. And then if you come real close, there's some little tiny roses that are three-dimensional, little flowers. And then this is ribbon work, wrapping ribbon and embroidering it on top of the fabric. It's really quite amazing. This case has two pieces in it by Deirdre Shearer. The first one, called Civil Union, it's amazing because she's taken some very, very, very tiny pieces of fabric to create shadows and forms for the faces. Look at the lips, for example. I mean, she's got at least 3 different pieces of fabric in there creating the shadow and the form of the lips. And then she does use machine stitching. And in fact, the machine stitches emphasize the form too. So you can see where it's building up the texture and the depth of the color too. She uses the stitching to define the form. Blue Buddha, which is the lower one, is the same thing. I mean, it's just wonderful. Small, small pieces of fabric where it's necessary, around the eyes, under the chin, creating the mouth, the hair. This is called a Friendship Quilt. It has squares that a group of people got together at different periods, because some of them have been signed. Most of them have been signed, but some of them were signed as early as 1850. And I think the latest one that I found was 1906, which is here. No, actually 1917 and 1906. And someone at some point put it all together, and we've hung it up. So it's quite wonderful. This is tambour work. This is a very old piece, and so is this. And then these are some more recent pieces, this piece and the one in the hoop that Judy Lund has done. Tambour work is actually taking one of these needles, and these are really quite wonderful tools, and catching a loop of thread on the back side of the fabric and pulling it through, and then catching it with another loop, so that it almost becomes a chain of stitches that create a pattern. We also have a garment here that was made very early in the 19th century, probably around 1830, that is covered with tambour work. And we can tell the way the garment is actually made, that it was made probably in the 1830s with the drop shoulder and the way the sleeve is connected to the bodice. That's it. The lower sampler here was done by Emma Jones in 1909, and the upper sampler was done by Judy Lund in 1963. She copied Emma's. I think she did a great job, but this was quite a work of art. Emma was very artistic. She did some wonderful watercolor paintings and cards and some other textile things, along with some beautiful art books too, which we have displayed periodically. This is a group of early 19th century samplers. This one on the left is from 1827, and then these two were probably done under the guidance of one teacher, because they have a lot of similar decoration. If you look around the edge, the flowers and leaves and stuff are very similar. And the layout of the samplers with the alphabets in different styles, and then the actual little poem that the student did. The top one is from 1830, the lower one is from 1834, but they're really quite wonderful. So this is one of the samplers that belongs to the RJD, and this was made by Amy Atkins Fuller in 1822. So we're going to end our tour looking at Amy's work, which is really quite charming, and this house almost looks like the RJD without porches. So thank you for coming on the tour. I have some time. I'd be glad to answer some questions. I hope you actually come and see the exhibit, because it's got lots of other things that I just did not focus on today.